The warning. The mountain pass bled white into the night, and the wind carried secrets older than kingdoms. Snow fell in sheets of silk and knife, burying the footprints of the last caravan that had dared the crossing 3 moons prior. Their bones still decorated the ravine below, picked clean by carrion birds and time itself. She knelt in the powder, her breath forming ghosts in the frozen air. The fur-lined cloak across her shoulders was wolf-made, stitched from pelts gifted, not taken. Her fingers, raw, cracked, the color of winter-bruised plums, moved with desperate precision. She carved symbols into the virgin snow, ancient glyphs that spoke of avalanche, of passage blocked, of death waiting patient and hungry in the dark. The travelers would come at dawn, they always did, merchants seeking the southern cities, refugees fleeing wars she would never hear about, pilgrims bound for temples she had never seen. They came because maps lied, because hope was a cruel master, because winter forgave nothing and no one. She worked faster. The blizzard was closing in, erasing her warnings as quickly as she could draw them. Her lips moved soundlessly, forming words that would never leave her throat. The silence inside her was a tomb, sealed 7 years ago by hands that claimed to love her, by a pack that called her weakness, by an alpha who could not bear an omega that questioned. They had cut her voice away with silver and ceremony. They had left her in the snow to die. The wolves had found her instead. Now she drew the last symbol, a spiral within a circle, the mark of sanctuary denied. Her palm pressed flat against the snow, feeling the earth's heartbeat far below. The mountain was restless tonight. Something stirred in the deep places, in the caverns where starlight had never touched. A howl split the darkness. She froze, hand still buried in the snow, head tilted toward the sound. Not a wolf, not quite. The note held too much intelligence, too much purpose. It came from the eastern ridge, where ancient pines stood like sentinels against the sky. Another howl answered from the west, then another from the south. She rose slowly, snow cascading from her cloak. Her eyes, one grey as storm clouds, one amber as firelight, scanned the tree line. The heterochromia was another mark of her difference, another reason the pack had cast her out. Omegas were meant to be soft, uniform, forgettable. She had been born wrong. The wind died suddenly. In the suffocating silence, she heard them. Paws against snow, dozens of them, moving with synchronized grace. The forest exhaled white wolves like breath-made flesh. They emerged from shadow and snowdrift, their fur luminous against the night. 20, 30, perhaps more. She lost count as they positioned themselves around the pass, around her warnings, around her. She had never seen so many together. The white wolves were solitary creatures, legends whispered by firelight. They were said to be the mountain's memory, the guardians of forgotten things, the shepherds of the lost and broken. They were said to choose their companions once in a generation. The largest stepped forward, a male with eyes like frozen lakes and a scar that bisected his muzzle. He was ancient, his wisdom carried in every measured step. He stopped 3 paces from her, lowered his massive head, and waited. She understood. She had always understood the language that existed before words, the communion that required no voice. Slowly, carefully, she extended her hand. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from recognition, from possibility. The wolf moved forward and pressed his scarred muzzle against her palm. His warmth radiated through her frost-bitten skin. Behind him, the pack moved closer, forming a circle around her warnings, around the symbols she had carved. They faced outward, 30 guardians, against whatever darkness the blizzard concealed. She closed her eyes and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not her voice, but something deeper, a knowing, a calling. The mountain had sent them. The mountain had been waiting for this moment, for her, for the convergence of warning and guardian, of the voiceless and those who needed no words. When she opened her eyes again, the snow had begun to glow with a light that came from nowhere and everywhere, illuminating her warnings until they blazed like prophecy carved in starlight. The Silent Tongue. 7 years ago, she had a name. It had been melodic, chosen by a mother who died bringing her into the world, a mother she never knew but whose absence lived in her marrow like an ache that predated memory. The pack called her Mira, small, diminutive, forgettable. She had been 18 when the ceremonies began, when her body betrayed her with the heat that marked an Omega's coming of age. The pack had gathered in the sacred grove where moonlight filtered through ancient oaks, where the earth smelled of iron and ritual. The Alpha, Veron, massive and golden-furred, with eyes that held all the mercy of winter storms, had approached her with a circlet of silver, twisted and sharp. "You will bond with Caius," Veron had announced, gesturing to his eldest son. Caius stood behind his father, handsome and cold, his gaze sliding over her like she was a thing to be catalogued and filed away. "You will bear strong pups. You will serve the pack's future." She had made the mistake of speaking, of questioning, of suggesting that perhaps she might choose her own mate, or better yet, choose freedom over bondage. The grove had fallen silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Veron's face had darkened like a bruise spreading across pale skin. An Omega does not question. An Omega does not refuse. "Then perhaps," she had said, her voice steady despite the terror climbing her spine, "I am no Omega at all." The circlet had been forced onto her tongue instead of her head. Silver burned Omega flesh differently than it burned Alphas or Betas. It seared, it scarred, it rewrote the very essence of what you were. They had chanted in the old language while she screamed, while her voice shattered into fragments that dissolved like smoke. They had held her down while the metal melted and fused and silenced. When they finally released her, when the silver had cooled and her tongue had been rendered useless as stone, Veron had leaned close. "The mountain takes all broken things. Let it take you." They had dragged her to the pass and left her in the snow, naked, voiceless, bleeding from the mouth. They had expected her to die within hours. Omega bodies were fragile without pack bonds, without warmth, without purpose. But she had crawled, had pulled herself through drifts that buried her to the chest, through cold that turned her fingers black. Had found a hollow in the rocks where an old trapper had once lived, his skeleton still sitting beside a cold fire, his furs waiting to warm someone else's bones. She had survived that first night, and the next, and the one after that. The white wolf had found her on the 4th day, not the scarred elder, but a younger female with eyes that held something like curiosity, like recognition. The wolf had brought her a rabbit, still warm, still bleeding. Had waited while she cooked it over a fire built from the trapper's wood. Had curled beside her that night, lending warmth that pushed back death. More wolves came. They brought food, brought warning when storms approached, brought a belonging she had never known, even when she had a voice, even when she had a pack. They taught her a different language, one of gesture and glance, of scent and stillness, one that required no tongue, no words, no permission to speak. She learned to read the mountain's moods in the way birds flew, in the taste of the wind, in the color of the dawn. She learned which passes were safe, which valleys held death, which caves sheltered those who needed shelter. She became a guardian of sorts, drawing warnings for travelers too stubborn or desperate to turn back. The white wolves watched over her as she watched over the passes, a symbiosis born of rejection and survival. But tonight was different. Tonight, the mountain itself seemed to hold its breath. Tonight, 30 guardians had gathered, where usually only 1 or 2 appeared. Tonight, the warnings she drew glowed with light that felt ancient and purposeful and new. Tonight, something was awakening. She touched her throat where the silver scar still lived, raised and twisted. The wolves had tried to remove it once, had dug at it with careful teeth until she bled. But silver worked into an Omega's flesh was permanent as a curse, as an identity rewritten. She would never speak again. Never form the words that crowded behind her teeth like prisoners, never sing the songs her mother had supposedly loved. But as the scarred elder pressed his muzzle against her palm, as 30 wolves formed a circle of protection, she wondered if perhaps silence was its own kind of power, if perhaps being voiceless meant learning to listen, if perhaps losing one tongue meant finding another, older, more true. The blizzard roared against their circle. The wolves did not move, neither did she. The first howl, the sound began deep in the scarred elder's chest, a rumble that traveled through her palm, up her arm into the hollow where her heartbeat lived. Then it rose, transformed, became a howl that split the night into before and after. It was not a warning, not a hunting cry. It was something older, pulled from a time when wolves and humans were not yet separate species, when the world was young and magic bled from every stone. The other wolves joined him, 30 voices braiding into a harmony that made the snow shimmer, that made the mountain tremble. She felt it in her bones, in her silent tongue, in the scars that mapped her survival. The howl was a calling, an announcement, a declaration to whatever watched from the dark that something had changed, that the voiceless had found her voice, that the broken had become whole in her breaking. The light from her warnings blazed brighter, casting shadows that danced like living things across the snow. The cymbals pulsed with each note of the song, danger, blocked passage, death waiting. But beneath those warnings, new meanings emerged. She could see them now, read them in the glow. Threshold, transformation, beginning. The elder released her hand and turned to face the eastern ridge. The others followed his gaze, their howling sustained, relentless, beautiful and terrible. She looked where they looked and saw why. Figures moved through the trees, human shapes, pack shapes, too many to count. They carried torches that guttered in the wind, carried weapons that gleamed silver in the firelight. They moved with the coordinated purpose of hunters who had tracked their prey across mountains and time. Her old pack, Veron's pack, they had come for her. The howling stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound, heavy with inevitability, with violence promised. The wolves tightened their circle, their bodies pressed close, their eyes fixed on the approaching figures. She could see their muscles coiled beneath winter coats, ready to spring, ready to tear, ready to die if necessary. For her, they would die for her. The thought cracked something in her chest. She had been alone for so long, defined by her silence, by her exile. She had survived, yes, but survival was not the same as being chosen, being protected, being claimed. Veron emerged from the tree line first, massive even at a distance, his golden fur catching torchlight. He carried a silver spear, the kind designed to kill wolves, to pierce their hearts and end them before they could howl, warning to their kin. Behind him came his sons, his daughters, his betas and omegas, perhaps 40 in all. They stopped at the edge of the pass, just beyond her warnings. Veron's voice carried across the snow, amplified by alpha power, by command that bent wills like green wood. The abomination returns, the voiceless Omega who refused her place. She said nothing, had nothing to say, but her eyes met his across the distance, and she let him see what 7 years in the mountain had made her. Let him see that she was not the same frightened girl they had silenced and discarded. The white wolves defend her, Veron continued, his gaze sliding to the circle of guardians. Ancient law forbids the killing of the mountain's chosen. But she is not chosen. She is cursed. She is broken. She is... The scarred elder howled again, cutting through Veron's words like a blade through silk. The other wolves joined instantly, their voices raised in contradiction, in challenge. The sound echoed off cliffs, multiplied, became a storm of its own. When the howling stopped, Veron's face had darkened. His pack shifted uneasily behind him. Even alphas feared the white wolves, feared what they represented, feared the mountain's judgment. "She drew the warnings," Veron said, gesturing to the glowing symbols. "She tries to stop us from crossing, but we have come for her, and we will not be denied." The elder wolf stepped forward, placed himself between her and the pack. His meaning was clear. "You will have to go through us, all of us, and we are not afraid of your silver, of your numbers, of your alpha rage." She touched the elder's flank, felt the old scars beneath his fur, battles fought and survived, years accumulated like snow. He was ancient, yes, but not weak. None of them were weak. They were the mountain's memory, the guardians of thresholds, the ones who stood between the lost and the darkness. They had chosen her. Despite her silence, despite her broken tongue, despite everything that made her unworthy in the pack's eyes. The choice mattered. The choice was everything. She stepped forward, moving to stand beside the elder, rather than behind him. The wolves parted slightly, making space, acknowledging her decision. Veron's eyes narrowed. She could see him calculating, weighing. Could see the moment he decided that she was not worth 40 wolf deaths, not worth his pack's decimation. But she could also see that he would not leave, not truly. He would wait for the moment the wolves' attention wavered, for the instant when her protection failed. He would wait, and when dawn came, he would strike. The circle of guardians. The night stretched long as prophecy. The standoff held, Veron's pack at the tree line, the white wolves in their circle, she in the center, like the eye of a storm that had not yet decided to break. The blizzard intensified, as if the mountain itself sought to intervene. Snow fell so thick it became a curtain, obscuring sight beyond a few paces. The torches across the pass guttered and died, leaving only the glow from her warnings and the reflected light in 40 pairs of wolf eyes. She should have been afraid, should have felt the terror that came with being hunted, with being the object of an alpha's rage. But fear required believing you had something left to lose. She had survived the unsurvivable, had been remade in the mountain's image. Death, when it came, would be just another transformation. The wolves shifted positions throughout the night, rotating in some pattern she gradually recognized. They were not merely guarding, they were performing a ritual, ancient as the stones, older than her pack's silver ceremonies. Each wolf took their turn at the cardinal points, north, south, east, west. Each pressed their nose to the glowing warnings, breathed in the light, then returned to the circle. When the scarred elder completed his rotation, he returned to her and did something unexpected. He pressed his forehead against hers, held the contact, and pushed. Not physically, but something else, a pressure inside her mind, behind her eyes, in the space where voice used to live. Images flooded her consciousness. A girl running through ancient forests, pursued not by enemies but by joy, by freedom. The same heterochromatic eyes, the same slim build, but centuries ago, millennia perhaps. The girl reached a clearing where white wolves waited, where the mountain opened into a cavern that glowed with the same light, now illuminating the warnings. The girl entered the cavern. The wolves followed. When they emerged, the girl had changed. Power radiated from her skin like heat, like light. She raised her hand and the forest bent, the wind obeyed, the very earth shifted at her command. She was the first Omega to refuse bondage, to choose the mountain's call over the pack's demands. She was the reason the white wolves existed at all. Her transformation had birthed them, had taken her humanity and woven it with wolf spirit until something new emerged. Something that could protect the broken ones who came after, the ones who would not bend, who would not submit, who carried within them the seed of the same transformation. The scarred elder pulled back, breaking the connection. She gasped, staggered. The vision clung to her mind like frost on glass. She understood now, truly understood. The white wolves were not merely guardians. They were her predecessors, the ones who had chosen the mountain over the pack, who had undergone the same transformation that was being offered to her now. She looked at the elder with new eyes, saw past the wolf form to the person who had once been, saw the scars not as battle marks, but as remnants of silver, of ceremonies, of voices stolen. Each wolf in the circle was a refuser, a rebel, an Omega who had said no to the chains offered as honor. They were her kin, her true pack. The elder turned his scarred muzzle skyward and howled. The others joined, but this time she heard the layers, the human voices beneath the wolf cry, the words in a language that predated words. They sang of transformation, of choice, of the power that lived in refusal. They sang for her, they sang her. Across the pass, Veron's pack stirred uneasily. Even through the blizzard, even from distance, they could feel the shift. Could sense that something was happening, that the night was building toward a crescendo that would change everything. Veron roared, his alpha voice cutting through the storm. "Dawn comes, abomination. When the sun rises, your guardians will tire. They will leave, as all wild things do, and you will be alone with us, with your pack, with the judgment you earned." But he was wrong. She would not be alone. She could feel it now, the choice crystallizing inside her chest, the decision that had always been inevitable. The mountain had been calling since the day they left her in the snow. The wolves had been shepherding her toward this moment, this threshold. She pressed her palm flat against the snow again, felt the earth's heartbeat accelerate, felt the cavern far below, the same cavern from the vision, the place where the first transformation occurred. It waited, patient as stone, certain as gravity. The mountain would open at dawn. The choice would be offered. She could walk into the light and become what the first Omega had become, could undergo the transformation that would give her power beyond voice, beyond pack bonds, beyond the fragile shell of humanity, could become guardian herself. Join the circle, protect the next broken one who would need protecting. Or she could remain as she was, voiceless, human, protected for one more night but vulnerable come morning. The wolves watched her, waited. They knew the choice was hers alone. They would not force, would not coerce. The transformation required consent, required desire, required the will to burn away what you were and embrace what you might become. She closed her eyes, touched her scarred throat, remembered the girl she had been, the one who had spoken despite fear, despite consequences, remembered that she had chosen silence over submission, had chosen exile over compliance. She had always been choosing this. Every day in the mountain, every warning drawn, every traveler saved. She had been walking toward this threshold since the moment they cut her voice away and thought it would break her. They had been fools. Silence had not weakened her. It had hollowed her out, made space for something far older and stronger to take root. When she opened her eyes, the decision blazed in her mismatched gaze. The elder saw it, and his scarred muzzle split in what might have been a wolf's version of a smile. The others pressed closer, their bodies warm against hers, their approval radiating through touch. Yes, their contact said. Yes, welcome. Yes, become. The warnings at her feet began to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. The light spread, illuminating the circle from within, turning each wolf's coat translucent so their bones showed through, so the human shapes beneath became visible for just a moment. Dawn was coming. The transformation was coming. She stood at the threshold between what she had been and what she would become, between voice lost and power found. And when the sun rose, when the mountain opened its heart, she would walk forward without hesitation, would choose the circle of guardians over the pack that had cast her out, would become the warning she had always been drawing. The blood moon rising. But dawn did not come as expected. Instead, the sky bled crimson through the blizzard. A blood moon rising despite the sun's impending arrival, an impossibility that rewrote the laws of celestial motion. The wolves grew agitated, their calm dissolving into restless movement. The scarred elder's eyes widened, and for the first time since the gathering began, she saw something like fear in his ancient gaze. This was not part of the pattern, not part of the transformation ritual that had repeated across millennia. Something had changed. Something was wrong. Across the pass, Veron's pack began to howl, not in challenge, but in pain. She watched through the bloody light as they doubled over, as their forms began to shift involuntarily. The blood moon forced transformation on unwilling bodies, twisted pack bonds into agony, stripped away choice. Veron himself fell to his knees, his massive frame convulsing. His howl became a scream, became a roar that shattered the night. When he rose, he was neither fully human nor fully wolf, a grotesque hybrid, stuck between forms, his eyes rolling with madness. "This is your doing," he snarled at her, his voice distorted, multiplied. "Your abomination has corrupted the moon itself." But it wasn't her. She could feel the wrongness in her bones, in her silent tongue, in the scars that suddenly burned like fresh wounds. This was older magic, angrier magic, something that had been sleeping and was now very much awake. The mountain rumbled, not the soft trembling that preceded snow, but a deep, violent shaking that split rocks and triggered avalanches. The sacred cavern beneath them, the place of transformation, was erupting, not with lava but with light, with raw power that predated the first Omega, that belonged to the mountain's original spirit. The white wolves tightened their circle, but even they seemed uncertain. The elder's hackles raised, his teeth bared not at Veron's pack, but at something else, something approaching from below, from the deep places where starlight had never touched. She understood suddenly, with the clarity that comes before catastrophe. The transformation was never meant to happen during a blood moon. The timing was crucial. Dawn was supposed to bring cleansing light, controlled power, safe passage between forms. But the blood moon twisted everything, amplified darkness instead of banishing it. If she attempted the transformation now, she would not become a guardian. She would become something else entirely, something monstrous. The choice was being taken from her. A howl erupted from the mountain itself, not from any wolf throat, but from the earth, from the cavern, from the place of power. It was a sound of rage, of hunger, of something that had waited too long and wanted what it was owed. Veron's hybrid form charged across the pass, silver spear raised, his pack following despite their agony. But they weren't charging at her. They were running from something behind them. She saw it emerge from the forest, shadows given form, darkness made flesh, creatures that resembled wolves the way nightmares resembled dreams. They were corrupted guardians, Omegas, who had attempted transformation during blood moons, who had been twisted by the wrong light, who had become hunters instead of protectors. Their white fur was now black as voids, their eyes empty pits that swallowed light. They had been waiting. Generation after generation, corrupted transformation after corrupted transformation, building their numbers in the deep places, waiting for another blood moon, another candidate, another chance to add to their ranks. They wanted her. The white wolves launched themselves at the shadow creatures, their circle breaking as they fought to protect her. But for every corrupted guardian they struck down, two more emerged from the forest, from the mountain, from the bloody light itself. The scarred elder threw himself at Veron, stopping the Alpha before his silver spear could reach her. They collided in an explosion of fur and rage, rolling through snow-stained red by moonlight. The elder's teeth found Veron's throat, but the hybrid Alpha was stronger, twisted by the blood moon into something beyond normal limits. She stood paralyzed, watching her protectors fall one by one, watching the corrupted guardians circle closer, their empty eyes fixed on her with terrible hunger, watching the mountain's light surge beneath her feet, demanding she make the choice, demanding she descend, demanding she transform now or never. The warnings at her feet blazed brighter, forming new symbols she hadn't drawn. Corruption, betrayal, end. The mountain itself was screaming at her to run, to flee, to escape while she still could. But where could she run? Veron's pack was behind her, corrupted guardians ahead, the mountain demanding payment below. There was nowhere that wasn't death, wasn't transformation into something she didn't want to become. Unless, the thought crystallized like ice. What if she chose neither? What if she refused both the corrupted transformation and the return to the pack? What if there was a third option, a space between choices where something new could emerge? She pressed both palms flat against the glowing warnings, closed her eyes, reached not down into the mountain but up toward the blood moon itself. If celestial impossibility had rewritten the rules, perhaps she could rewrite them again. Her silent tongue moved, forming words that couldn't be heard but might be felt. She shaped intention, desire, refusal, shaped the power that lived in 7 years of survival, in warnings drawn for strangers, in existence carved from exile. The light beneath her palms changed. Not red, not white, but silver, the same silver that scarred her throat, that had tried to silence her. But this time, the silver was hers to command. She pulled it up from her deepest wounds, from the place where voice died, from the scar tissue that mapped her survival. And she pushed it out. Silver light exploded from her center, not violent but absolute. It washed over the corrupted guardians, and they shrieked, their shadow forms dissolving like nightmares at dawn. It touched the white wolves, and their wounds sealed, their strength returned. It reached Veron, and he screamed, his hybrid form snapping back to human, his silver spear melting into harmless liquid. The blood moon above flickered, its crimson light fighting against the silver erupting from her core. For a moment, the sky held both colors, a war between corruption and reclamation, between what the moon demanded and what she refused. Then the silver won. The blood moon shattered, dissolved, became simply the dawn it should have always been. True sunrise spilled across the mountain, golden and clean. The corrupted guardians fled back into the deep places, their howls fading to echoes. Veron's pack scattered, dragging their alpha with them, broken and terrified. The white wolves returned to their circle, but this time they bowed, not to her humanity, but to what she had become in that moment of refusal. Neither human nor wolf, neither voiced nor voiceless. Something between, something new. She had transformed after all. Just not in the way the mountain expected. Not through descent into power, but through ascent beyond it. The scarred elder approached, his injuries already healing. He pressed his forehead to hers one final time, and she felt his approval, his wonder, his recognition that she had done what none before her had managed. She had created a new path. When he pulled back, 30 white wolves raised their voices in unison, not a howl of calling or warning, but of celebration, of welcome to the circle not as a wolf, but as something unprecedented, as a guardian who walked between worlds, who needed neither voice nor transformation to protect, who had turned her silence into a power no magic could match. Dawn's promise. The mountain settled as the true dawn spread its light across the snow. The warnings she had drawn were fading now, their purpose fulfilled, their power absorbed into her transformation. Where symbols had blazed, only smooth snow remained, unmarked, pristine, waiting for the next traveler's footprints. She should have felt different, should have sensed some fundamental shift in her flesh, in her bones, in the hollow where her voice used to live. But the change was subtler than that, more profound than physical transformation could ever be. She felt whole. For the first time since the silver ceremony, since the exile, since the mother she never knew died bringing her into a world that didn't want her, she felt complete. The white wolves began to disperse as morning established itself, not all at once, but gradually, each pressing their muzzle to her hand before departing. They had duties elsewhere, passes to guard, warnings to heed, lost souls to find. The circle couldn't remain forever, and she understood that now. Protection was not permanent containment. It was giving someone the strength to stand alone. The scarred elder remained longest, his ancient eyes studying her with something like paternal pride. He huffed once, a sound that might have been laughter in another form, then turned toward the western peaks. Before he disappeared into the trees, he looked back, and she felt his message in her chest. You are guardian now, not through transformation, but through choice, through refusal, through becoming what no one expected. When he vanished into the forest, only 3 wolves remained, the youngest of the pack, barely more than pups by guardian standards. They sat before her, waiting, and she realized what they wanted, what they needed: permission to stay. She knelt in the snow, eye level with them, and nodded. Yes, if you choose this, if you want to learn a different kind of guarding, a different path, stay. They pressed close, their warmth radiating against her frost-bitten skin. They would be her pack now, small, strange, but hers. 3 wolves and a voiceless Omega, protecting a mountain pass from threats both mundane and magical. It was enough. More than enough. She stood, the wolves rising with her, and began the walk back to her shelter, the trapper's hollow that had become home. The journey took hours, the snow deep and treacherous, but her legs were strong from 7 years of mountain living. The wolves ranged around her, playing occasionally, testing the boundaries of their new pack bond. When they reached the hollow, she found it transformed. Somehow, through wolf magic or mountain blessing or sheer improbability, it had expanded. What had been a small cave was now a proper dwelling, complete with space for her human needs and dens for her wolf companions. Gifts hung from hooks, furs, dried meat, herbs she recognized from the lower valleys. The white wolves had prepared this, had known what she would become, what she would need, had been waiting for her to choose herself so they could give her the tools to continue choosing. She built a fire using the trapper's eternal supply of wood, cooked meat the wolves brought, shared the meal in comfortable silence, the kind that was choice rather than curse, communion rather than isolation. When darkness fell again, normal darkness free of blood moons and celestial impossibilities, they curled together for warmth. She dreamed of the first Omega, the ancient one whose vision the scarred elder had shown her. But this time the girl didn't enter the cavern alone. She had companions, had choice, had the freedom to transform or not transform, to become wolf or remain human, or find something between. She dreamed of all the Omegas who had come before, who had chosen the mountain over the pack, who had found power in refusal. And she dreamed of those who would come after, the ones she would find, would protect, would offer the same choice, transform if you wish, but know that wholeness doesn't require changing your form. Sometimes wholeness requires only claiming the form you already have. When she woke, dawn was spilling through the cave entrance, painting everything gold and possible. Her 3 wolves were already awake, waiting patiently for her to rise. She touched her scarred throat, still silent, still marked, still permanent, but the silence no longer felt like absence. It felt like space, like listening, like the quiet before creation, when anything might emerge if you waited long enough, if you refused to fill the emptiness with noise. She walked to the cave entrance and looked out at her mountain, her pass, her territory to guard. The first travelers would come soon, they always did. And she would draw her warnings, and the wolves would watch, and together they would protect those who needed protecting. Not through transformation, not through power borrowed from ancient magic or celestial events, through choice, through refusal to be what others demanded, through the simple revolutionary act of becoming herself. The mountain wind carried no words, needed no voice. It spoke in temperatures and pressure, in the scent of coming storms, in the way it moved through the pass and promised both danger and safe crossing. She had become fluent in that language, had become part of the mountain's vocabulary, a symbol it used to warn and welcome, to protect and test. She was the Omega who drew warnings in the snow, who was surrounded by 30 white wolves at dawn, who refused transformation and became whole through refusal. She was her own beginning, her own ending. Her own story, written in symbols that glowed with borrowed light, told in silence that spoke volumes, survived in a body that bore scars like badges of honor rather than marks of shame. The 3 wolves pressed against her legs, impatient for the day to begin. She smiled, a gesture no one would see but everyone would feel, and stepped out into the dawn, ready to guard, ready to warn, ready to protect the next lost soul who would find their way to her pass, to her wolves, to the choice she represented, ready to be precisely what she had become, unchanged and utterly transformed, voiceless and perfectly heard, alone and surrounded by pack. Whole. The marked ones. Winter deepened across the mountain, and with it came the marked ones, not travelers seeking passage, but refugees fleeing something worse than weather. They arrived in groups of 3 or 4, stumbling through drifts that rose to their chests, their eyes wild with exhaustion and terror. The first group she found huddled in a ravine, half frozen, clutching each other for warmth that had long since abandoned their bodies. When she approached with her 3 wolves, they flinched back, expecting predators. She showed them her throat instead, tilted her head back so the silver scar caught the light, so they could see that she too had been marked, had been broken by the same system that now hunted them. Recognition flickered in their eyes. The eldest, a woman perhaps 40 years old, with grey streaking her dark hair, touched her own throat where bruises in the shape of fingers still lingered. "You escaped too," the woman whispered. Not a question, a statement of kinship. She nodded, gestured for them to follow. The wolves led the way, breaking trail through the deep snow, and she brought them to the hollow that had become sanctuary, fed them, wrapped them in furs, let them sleep for 3 days straight while she and the wolves kept watch. When the woman finally woke, truly woke, she spoke in fragments. "They're hunting Omegas, not just exiling anymore, hunting. The Alphas have gone mad with it, convinced that every Omega who refuses bonding is a threat to pack survival. They've formed coalitions, hunting parties that cross territorial lines. No Omega is safe." More marked ones came. A young man with both his hands broken, the fingers set wrong, because he'd tried to fight back when they came for his sister. Twin girls who'd fled their pack together, their bond as mates forbidden under the old laws that demanded Omegas breed with Alphas. An elder who'd lost his voice not to silver, but to decades of being told his words didn't matter, his silence a different kind of scar. The hollow expanded to accommodate them. More mountain magic, more blessing from the guardians who watched from the peaks. Her sanctuary became a refuge, a place whispered about in terrified Omega networks, a location marked on maps drawn in desperate secrecy. She was no longer just a guardian of the pass. She'd become a guardian of the marked, the exiled, the ones who refused to bend. The 3 wolves multiplied, not in numbers, but in presence. White guardians appeared when needed, vanished when the danger passed. They brought food, brought warning when hunting parties drew near, brought the mountain's protection to those who had no protection of their own. She taught the marked ones her language of survival, how to read the mountain's moods, how to draw warnings that would glow with power, how to move through snow without leaving tracks, how to be silent, not from shame, but from strategy, how to disappear when you needed to disappear, how to become part of the landscape itself. The woman with bruised throat became her second, helping organize the refugees, teaching them to fight when fighting was necessary, to flee when wisdom demanded it. The young man with broken hands learned to use weapons despite his crooked fingers, became a sentry who could spot hunting parties from miles away. The twin girls discovered they could sense each other's thoughts across distances, became scouts who covered twice the ground of anyone else. The sanctuary grew into something like a pack, but different. No alpha ruled them. No hierarchy demanded submission. They organized themselves through consensus, through respect, through the simple recognition that survival required cooperation without domination. She watched them find themselves, watched broken ones become whole, not through transformation, but through community, through being seen, being protected, being given the space to choose who they wanted to be. But she also watched the darkness gathering. The hunting parties were growing bolder, better organized. They discovered the general location of her sanctuary, even if the mountain's magic kept the exact location hidden. They were setting traps, laying ambushes, trying to starve them out by cutting off escape routes. Veron was leading them. She'd seen him from a distance, his golden fur unmistakable even through blizzards. The blood moon transformation had broken something in him, had turned his alpha rage into obsession. He blamed her for his humiliation, for the scars that now mapped his psyche, for the pack members he'd lost to fear and desertion. He would not stop until she was dead, until every marked Omega in her sanctuary was returned to their packs in chains or buried in the snow. The woman with bruised throat sat beside her one night, both of them watching the fire while the others slept. "He's coming soon," the woman said quietly. "You can feel it, can't you? The pressure building. Like the mountain itself is holding its breath." She nodded, could feel it in her bones, in her scars, in the way the wolves circled restlessly. A confrontation was inevitable. Veron would not allow her defiance to stand, would not permit this sanctuary to exist. He saw it as a cancer, spreading weakness, encouraging other Omegas to refuse their place. "We could run," the woman continued, "take everyone deeper into the mountain, find another pass, another valley. Keep running until there's nowhere left to run." But that wasn't survival. That was just slow death, stretched across years instead of compressed into moments. She shook her head. "Then we fight," the woman said. Her voice held no fear, only certainty. "We make a stand. We show them that marked ones can defend themselves, that Omegas aren't helpless, that silence can roar louder than any Alpha's command." She touched the woman's hand, a gesture of gratitude, of recognition. Yes. They would fight, not because they wanted violence, but because sometimes refusal required more than words. Sometimes it required standing your ground when the ground itself was crumbling beneath your feet. The woman smiled, fierce and proud. "Good, because I'm tired of running, tired of being afraid, tired of letting Alphas define what we are, what we're worth." She stood, moved to wake the others. "If we're going to fight, we need to prepare. We need to turn this sanctuary into a fortress." The marked ones rallied with surprising speed. They'd all been running, all been afraid, all been broken. But being broken was different from being defeated. The young man organized defenses, using his knowledge of pack tactics to predict where Veron would strike. The twin girls scouted constantly, mapping enemy movements. The elder who'd lost his voice created a communication system using bells and drums, turning his silence into strategy. And she drew warnings across the entire pass, not to deter travelers, but to trap hunters, symbols that would confuse, that would lead hunting parties in circles, that would make the mountain itself an enemy to those who came with violence in their hearts. The white wolves gathered again. Not 30 this time, but more. 50, perhaps 60, their numbers swollen by guardians who'd heard the call, who recognized that this stand mattered. That if the sanctuary fell, if the marked ones were slaughtered, it would send a message to every Omega in every pack. There is no escape, no refuge, no alternative to submission. The scarred elder returned, older now but no less powerful. He pressed his forehead to hers and she felt his message. "We stand with you, not as protectors, but as equals. This fight belongs to all of us." When he pulled back, his eyes held something like sorrow. Because he knew, they all knew, that some of them would not survive what was coming, that standing your ground sometimes meant bleeding on it, that fighting back sometimes meant dying on your feet instead of living on your knees. But they would stand anyway, would fight anyway, would make Veron and his hunting coalition understand that marked ones were not prey, were not weaklings, were not throwaways to be discarded when they refused to bend. They were guardians, every one of them. Guardians of their own dignity, their own choice, their own right to exist outside the chains offered as honor. The mountain rumbled its approval. The sanctuary blazed with light from 1,000 warnings. The wolves raised their voices in a song that was battle cry and lullaby, threat and promise, ending and beginning. And she stood at the center of it all, voiceless and perfectly heard, marked and utterly whole, preparing to fight not for transformation or power or revenge, but for something simpler and more revolutionary: the right to refuse, the right to choose, the right to be exactly what you were and nothing that you weren't. Dawn was coming, and with it, Veron's final assault. The last stand. They came with the sunrise, as she knew they would. Alpha Pride demanded visibility, demanded witnesses. Veron led a coalition of perhaps 200 wolves, drawn from a dozen packs, united by their conviction that Omega defiance was a disease that had to be cauterized. The hunting party filled the pass, a sea of fur and fangs and silver weapons, their howls echoing off the cliffs like thunder promising storm. They moved with military precision, formations designed to overwhelm, to crush, to leave nothing standing. But they stopped when they saw what waited for them. The marked ones stood in formation across the narrow throat of the pass, 40 refugees who'd been broken and had chosen to remain standing anyway. Behind them, 60 white guardians, their fur luminous in the dawn light. And at the center, she stood with her 3 wolves, her sanctuary at her back, her scars catching the sun like badges of honor. Veron pushed forward through his coalition, his golden fur now streaked with grey, his eyes holding the madness that comes from obsession unchecked. He'd aged years in the months since their last confrontation, worn down by his need for vengeance, by his inability to accept that some Omegas would never submit. "This ends today," he roared, his alpha voice rolling across the snow. "You've corrupted enough Omegas with your defiance, your sanctuary of weaklings and refuses. The coalition has voted. You will be eliminated, your guardians scattered, your sanctuary burned to ash. The natural order will be restored." The woman with bruised throat stepped forward, her voice carrying despite its roughness, "There's nothing natural about chains, nothing orderly about forcing bonds. You call us weak, but we're the ones who survived your cruelty. We're the ones who chose ourselves when you offered us nothing but submission. You chose to be rogue," Veron spat, "to exist without pack bonds, without structure, without purpose. You are abominations, every one of you." "No," the young man with broken hands said, raising his crooked fingers. "We're free, and that terrifies you, doesn't it? Because if Omegas can survive without packs, without alphas dictating our worth, then what power do you actually have? What purpose do you serve?" Veron's face twisted with rage. He raised his silver spear, the same weapon he'd carried during the blood moon, reforged and sharpened. "Enough words. You want to die standing? So be it. Coalition! Attack!" The 200 wolves surged forward like an avalanche, like inevitability made flesh. But they crashed against something unexpected. The warning she'd drawn across the pass blazed to life, forming a barrier of light that stopped the charge cold. Wolves yelped as they collided with the barrier, their momentum turned against them, their formations breaking apart. "Now!" the woman with bruised throat shouted. The marked ones attacked. Not with the precision of trained warriors, but with the desperation of people who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. They used weapons they'd crafted in the sanctuary: spears, clubs, slings. They used tactics the young man had taught them: hit and fade, never hold ground, make them chase you into traps. The white guardians joined them, flowing between the marked ones like water, their teeth finding throats, their claws opening bellies. They fought with the accumulated rage of Omegas, transformed across millennia, every guardian remembering their own exile, their own choice, their own refusal. The battle became chaos. Blood stained the snow red and pink and black. Bodies fell on both sides, marked ones who'd survived so much only to die defending others. Coalition wolves who discovered too late that Omegas could kill as effectively as Alphas. Guardians who chose sacrifice over retreat. She moved through the battle like silence made lethal. She had no voice to roar, no fangs to tear, but she had silver, the power she'd claimed during the blood moon, the magic born from her scars. She touched coalition wolves and they froze, trapped in their own bodies, their movements turned to stone. Veron saw her working through his ranks and charged, his spear aimed at her heart. The scarred elder intercepted him, ancient wolf meeting golden alpha in a collision that shook the mountain. They fought with the intensity of old enemies, each knowing the other's moves, each seeking the fatal opening. The elder was faster, more experienced, but Veron was younger, stronger, driven by madness that gave him unnatural endurance. The spear found the elder's flank, silver burning through fur and flesh. The elder howled, not in pain, but in defiance. His teeth closed around Veron's throat. For a moment, they held that position, the elder bleeding silver fire, Veron's throat trapped in jaws that could crush steel. Then Veron did the unthinkable. He drove the spear deeper, twisting it, using his own impalement as leverage to break the elder's grip. Both fell, both bled, both dying. She ran to the elder, her 3 wolves flanking her, their bodies shielding her from the chaos. She pressed her hands to his wounds, trying to channel her silver power into healing, into stopping the poison spreading through his ancient body. The elder's eyes found hers. Even dying, even fading, he managed something like a smile. His message pulsed into her mind, weaker than before, but no less clear. You don't need me anymore. You never did. You are the elder now. Lead them, protect them, choose them, as I chose you. She felt him die, felt the moment his spirit left his body, felt centuries of wisdom and protection and choice bleed into the snow. The ancient guardian who had shown her the path, who had offered her the circle, who had believed in her refusal, gone. Grief became fury. Fury became power. She stood, leaving the elder's body with reverence, and faced Veron where he lay bleeding and dying. He looked up at her, his eyes still holding rage, still holding contempt, even as his life leaked away. You've destroyed everything, he gasped. The natural order, pack bonds, alpha authority. She knelt beside him, placed her scarred throat directly in his line of sight, forcing him to look at what he'd done, what he represented. Then she did something she hadn't done in 7 years. She tried to speak. No sound emerged. Her vocal cords were dead as stone, her voice murdered by silver and ceremony, but her lips moved, forming words he could read if he chose to. You destroyed yourself. We just survived you. Understanding flickered in his eyes, recognition that his obsession had consumed him, that his need to control had been his undoing. Then that light faded. Veron, Alpha of Alphas, leader of the coalition, died alone in the snow, killed by his own fear of Omega freedom. The battle was ending. The coalition, seeing their leader dead, their formations shattered, began to retreat. Some fled back down the pass. Others simply stopped fighting, sat in the snow with their heads bowed, exhausted by violence that achieved nothing. The marked ones didn't pursue. They were defenders, not conquerors. They let the coalition go, let them carry their wounded and their dead back to their packs, let them spread the story of what happened when Alphas tried to eliminate Omega refusal. She stood among the bodies, marked ones, coalition wolves, white guardians, and felt the weight of survival. They'd won. They'd defended the sanctuary. They'd proven that Omegas could stand against Alphas and remain standing, but the cost was written in blood across the snow. The woman with bruised throat approached, limping from a wound across her leg. We'll bury our dead, she said quietly. Honor them. Remember them. They died free, and that matters. She nodded, looked across the pass at the survivors, marked ones embracing, wolves licking wounds, the sun climbing higher into a sky washed clean by violence. They would rebuild, would heal, would continue offering sanctuary to those who needed it, and she would lead them. Not as Alpha, not as guardian in the traditional sense, but as what the scarred elder had named her, something unprecedented, something between, something that proved transformation wasn't the only path to power, that wholeness could be claimed rather than earned, that silence could speak louder than any roar. She touched her throat one final time. The scar would never fade. The voice would never return. But standing among her people, because they were her people now, her pack, her responsibility, she understood that some wounds were meant to remain, were meant to remind you of what you'd survived, what you'd refused, what you'd become through refusing. The mountain wind carried no words, but it carried meaning, carried promise, carried the message that would spread through every Omega in every pack. There is a sanctuary. There is a place where marked ones protect each other. There is an Omega who turned her silence into revolution, who stood against 200 wolves and remained standing. There is another way. The refugees would come, more marked ones seeking freedom, more white guardians answering the call. The sanctuary would grow, would become legend, would become the proof that pack bonds weren't the only way to survive, that Alpha authority wasn't inevitable, that Omegas could choose themselves and thrive. She had drawn her warning in the snow. 30 wolves had surrounded her at dawn. She had been voiceless, marked, broken by every measure her old pack valued, and she had become whole anyway, had become guardian, leader, revolutionary, had become the warning herself, a living symbol of what happened when you refused to be what others demanded. The sun climbed higher. The battle faded into memory. The marked ones began the work of burying their dead, tending their wounded, rebuilding their sanctuary. And she stood at the center of it all, silent and strong, scarred and sacred, proving with every breath that survival was a choice, that freedom was worth fighting for, that sometimes the greatest transformation was refusing to transform at all. The mountain had called her. The wolves had chosen her. She had answered by becoming herself, completely, unapologetically, permanently herself. And that, more than any magic or transformation or power, was enough. It had always been enough.